Hey, it's Grayson. This is the Fixer Punk podcast. Today, I wanted to cover the subject of mutual aid, which has gotten a lot of coverage during the COVID-19 pandemic, but I wanted to give it a specific Fixer Punk angle. And that is mutual aid as it relates to personal development, mental health, and wellness. So to start out, mutual aid is actually a concept that is based on the idea that a party who needs help also has the ability to provide help themselves and contribute to the process. And it's a symbiotic process of providing assistance between groups of people autonomously and without a hierarchy. It's usually contrasted to a typical charity where you will have a leader, a board of trustees that is dictating how resources are to be allocated, what types of services are going to be provided, what types of assistance are going to be given, and creating a relationship with that hierarchy with the recipients of the service. Whereas in mutual aid, the recipients of the service are basically the board of directors, and the recipients of the services are sometimes also the ones giving the services or the products, whatever's being provided within that group. It's mostly recently during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of it for different types of food distributions, medical care services even. You've seen ones that are focused on providing homeless people with resources, just giving cash assistance for utility bills and for rent payments, things like that. And these are all organized without a hierarchy, without it being an organization controlling it, and with the feedback and the input and the participation of the people who are in need of the help. This is a very important point because I've come to realize, and this is especially true in the context of things like personal development and mental health, that a hierarchical approach, and which inherently becomes authoritarian at some point when you're asserting this sort of power over somebody's life to tell them what to do, the people who are facing the issue are oftentimes the ones with the best solutions. And that is often ignored because they're just people in need of assistance. So we, the benevolent people in charge, have to come up with the solution and impose it upon them. That is just simply not the case. So to bring this back to the sort of the concepts of self-development, you have the typical model of self-development, which is you have a leader, you have in a mental health context, you have a therapist, somebody with a professional license. You have gurus, motivational speakers. You have these people who are basically saying, this is what you are to do. You are to follow it. You must do it this way. And that is how you are going to be helped, with a bunch of requirements, strings, and biases aplenty. What I've kind of figured out, and this is sort of novel for me, is figuring out sort of a mutual aid approach to the idea of personal development that includes the circumstances of my peers, that includes the circumstances of people around me. Obviously, I wholly entirely support the use of professionals, both in the forms of coaches, in the forms of people who have expertise in self-development, and then in the mental health space, I absolutely 100% endorse good, qualified psychological and psychiatric professionals who know their science well and who know how to apply a good scientific method to solving their patients' problems from their particular disciplines. But on the other hand, the other expert in the room is the person near the service. and their input has to be taken as an important input. I think that the difference in a mutual aid mindset is really that not only does the person giving help have something good and valuable to offer, but the person who's receiving the help has something good and valuable to offer as well. So what I've done to kind of put this into practice is to actually, this is actually going to be really simple, and this is a practice that it's not going to sound like anything revolutionary because lots of people do it. But I've put together a practice of having different people that I'm working with together to be accountable on goals that I have, like specific goals. Like first off, I started with one that I was working with on fitness goals. I have another one that's more on like organizing stuff. And then I've worked on ones that are more like oriented toward business. I have basically just buddies, people that don't have any professional esteem or expertise or anything like that, but people that I go back and forth with and I talk to on a regular basis about where I'm holding each other accountable to complete tasks, to do things, because we both feel that that type of daily feedback is going to help us progress and help us do better things in our lives. And of course, we're both responsive to our feedback. We don't follow a framework set up by another person necessarily, not some rigid manual that you might see in a medical setting or in a setting of like a life coach or a business coach or a fitness coach. We don't follow specific manuals. We look at what we think is best for each other and communicate with each other and discuss like what we want to do and where we want to go. And we found mechanisms that work for us of communicating instead of like a once a week or a twice a week session with a professional, because we feel like that would drop off a little too much, not hold us accountable in the way we want to. So we sort of created this little practice here of talking to each other and formulating our own solutions to our own problems, using our own expertise, inspired by and with the assistance of qualified professionals as needed. And that is just one very simple way of getting it done. Neither of us is making money off of this. Neither of us has control or power over each other, but we make it work. We keep going with a relationship that's symbiotic to learn how to improve our situations. And it's worked fairly well in combination with medications I'm taking for ADD. Sort of having these relationships just kind of kept me like, oh yeah, I need to do this thing. I need to go and record an episode of the Fixer Punk podcast. I need to organize this, and it's worked out pretty well. But on a much larger and a more systemic scale, what's being done is, and this needs to be done at sort of the level of resource allocation, is we kind of intuitively know what the solutions are to our problems are. Sometimes we've had our minds clouded by other people's ideas, by fear of retaliation, by fear of being wrong. We have suppressed our own ideas as to what will actually work for us and work in our context. We have to work to make those ideas to be analyzed and considered to be on the same level as whatever the institutions and the establishment says. Because the institution and the establishment, they don't know you personally. They don't know your circumstances. Oftentimes the people that are in these institutions don't represent who we are. You're not going to see the kind of racial diversity. You're not going to see the diversity in terms of sexual orientation. You're not going to see the types of diversity in terms of disability. You're not going to see that type of diversity oftentimes in the professionals. Sometimes you do, and that's a great thing. There are professionals who've worked on different ways of incorporating social context. There's something called the liberation health model in mental health that's very important. There's been some sort of more revolutionary work in terms of nutrition and fitness and things like that. That includes that, and so that the services can work with the individual context, because the model that I'm talking about of just working with other people at the same level and mutually supporting each other, again, it's free. That works, that cost and that financial friction works better for people who are in who are in different classes, who are in different levels of different levels economically than the people in power, because a lot of this stuff that's done in self-development is based upon, even when it's supposed to be more populist stuff, it's based upon at least a upper class existence. And the norms of how things are set up assume all of that. The protocols out there assume that you are going to be able to, if you're trying to lose weight, a lot of them will just assume that you're going to have access to a gym with all this equipment. You're going to have access to specific good nutritious foods that may not be as easily accessible within your price point, that you can afford to pay hundreds of dollars at a time for trainers, things like that. And it's important to know what works in that context. And even if you were to take the money, you were to grab a credit card, you were to buy the expertise of some excellent trainer to help you with your weight loss or whatever, and they've been working with a lot of people that are of much higher economic status than you are, that maybe don't deal with the disability that you've dealt with. Maybe they don't have the cultural context. There's going to be things in their approach that are not going to work for you. And your input is important. Your ideas are important. Your on-the-ground knowledge of your own life is important. And that needs to be factored into the approach. So you want to cultivate and establish professional relationships also that have this attitude. And too often it seems like professionals, because of course there is sort of a privilege, there's an entitlement, and some of it is rightly so, of like having a certain title, having a certain status in society, like my way or the highway. In mental health, you see people like Dr. Phil that just get angry at people and impose their own norms in some way and say, the only way for you to get help is for you to do it the way that I do it. And what you're saying, what your input is on this doesn't have any bearing on it, because in his case, you're crazy. Or in the case of fitness, you're fat. So what do you know? What do you know here? Look at me. I'm better than you. I know better than you. But what you don't know is you don't know what it's like to be that person. And that is how you sort of get lost from the goal. And that's how oftentimes things won't work, is because they are not designed for you. The system's not designed for you. It's not designed for your circumstances. Customizing and working with not just experts, but also working with people in your own community who are going to support you, who have been through your set of circumstances, who are living a life similar to you, is very important, not just because it's extra help, but because you can pick up patterns. If I had somebody who was going through the same journey I was when I had my head injury, I could have picked up, oh yeah, this is exactly my problem before the doctors did. So I can tell the doctors, look, this is what you should do. And you always want to make sure that people you're working with will take your opinion and your input very, very, very seriously. And in the design of solutions at a systemic level, we cannot just take the honestly simplistic and sometimes unscientific approaches held by gurus as being prescriptions for policy. So you have somebody like a Dr. Phil for mental health, who's like, okay, all you have to do is just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The most important thing is that you get yourself back to work. There are lots of videos critiquing him on this. For obesity, you have like these fitness influencers who are like, you have to, even talking about severely obese people, they don't look at their context. They just tell them, you have to be in this strict diet. And it's like, no, you don't have to be in that place. That is one way to do it. It is a way, but it is not the only way. There are other ways, and we need to create a dialogue that is open to that, because that if that dialogue's not there, then you have these people who have gained large amounts of media esteem. And this is sort of a form of community organizing, to talk to the masses, to communicate with the media, communicate with academia about the lessons learned from the field, the lessons learned from individual communities' experiences tackling a certain problem, so that narrative isn't lost when Congress wants to talk about policy around your particular issue, policy around how we include people with disabilities. You can have you can have examples, and this is one of the things of, like, if you want to start a mutual aid group, you could start implementing certain solutions and even just crowdsourcing ideas of, you're in this circumstance, what would help you? The person in that circumstance knows what would help them, and those ideas should be taken very, very seriously. So on a practical level, it starts out, of course, by you kind of working on these things yourself, trying to figure out, looking at your life. You're like, okay, I see all these problems happening in my life. What would help me? And what could another person I'm working with do to help me in this situation? How can we share ideas? Then you bring it out to a larger community level. You have different groups, and you want to establish that mindset of, we're not going to blindly follow a leader. We're not going to blindly follow the financial advice of Dave Ramsey, follow Financial Peace University and the debt snowball. We're not going to follow that dogmatically. We're going to look at how we as like in my case, Latino, disabled, people with lower incomes are doing, and how are other friends who may be Black, female, and with kids, how they're doing in their particular contexts with solving their financial problems. We're not imposing these programs without knowing first which ones work best for us. And be ready to experiment. Next episode, I have to do an episode on the whole concept of anti-fragility and knowing how to fail, because I think this is a big part of it. Because a lot of times programs set you up for defeat. They're like, if you don't do it exactly this way, if you aren't 100% free of credit cards, if you aren't 100% free of debt, you're bad off financially. Common Dave Ramsey stuff. If you're not 100% free of carbs, you're never going to be fit. Keto diets. If you're not always positive about everything and turning a blind eye to the injustices in the world, you're not going to be able to be successful. All the attitude, business, personal development types. And you do want to challenge those assumptions, but challenging those assumptions is kind of hard. It's like skateboarding. You're doing something that's counter to the environment around you, and you're making something out of it. Handrail isn't meant for you to do a board slide on it. A handrail is not really built for that, unless it's built in a skate park, of course. But that isn't the original design of it. You're making something else of it. You can take some of these ideas. You can take the ideas of a financial expert like a Dave Ramsey, cut out stuff you don't want, make what you want of it, and you're creating something. And that's something's legitimate. But it's hard, and because it is uncharted territory, and because you're not the most refined person in the world, it's going to be a little messy. So that's where the learning how to fail comes in very handy. And it's something that is necessary for the progression, not just of yourself, but of society. And that's what we look to do here. We're not just looking for progression for ourselves. We're not just looking for stuff for ourselves. We're looking to help other people here at the Fixer Punk podcast. Go to the website, fixerpunk.com, subscribe to the podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at GreysonNation, GreysonNation, on Twitter. That's where I update the most. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you back here for the next episode.